Indiana, 1951. Cold case solved. Arrest shocks the community. They called her name until their voices cracked and the night swallowed their echoes. By dawn, the sheriff's department had joined the search. Deputies on horseback swept the cornfields. Volunteers formed human chains through the forest. Bloodhounds were brought in from 2 counties over, but the dogs kept circling back to one place, the Hamilton farm. Specifically, the old hay barn behind it, the one Thomas Hamilton insisted no one had any reason to go near. No tracks were found, no torn fabric, no signs of a struggle. It was as if Rachel had simply stepped off the earth. The entire county was shaken. A girl like Rachel didn't just disappear. Not here. Not in a town where gossip traveled faster than the church bell's noon chime, where every stranger was noticed, where secrets had no place to hide. Or so they thought. For weeks, Whitfield County lived in a fog of fear and confusion. Search parties stretched on for miles. Farmers missed harvest days to comb the woods. Rachel's parents stopped sleeping entirely. Her mother sat by the window each night, staring at the road, praying to see her daughter walking toward home. But nothing. Not a clue, not a footprint, not a whisper. The sheriff questioned Thomas Hamilton multiple times. Each time he gave the same story. Rachel left at noon, said her stomach hurt, and walked toward home. Calm, controlled, unshaken, too unshaken. Margaret Hamilton, meanwhile, avoided every question. She kept her eyes on the floor, wringing her hands until her knuckles bled. People whispered about that. About the way she flinched when Thomas entered the room. About the bruises on her wrist she tried to hide with a handkerchief. But gossip was all it was. No evidence, no body, no crime. Rachel's disappearance sank into the unsolved files. Her family never recovered. Her mother aged 10 years in one summer. Her siblings learned too early that the world could take someone without warning. And Whitfield County learned to fear shadows they once trusted. Life moved forward, as life always does, even when it shouldn't. Thomas Hamilton kept running his farm. He became even more respected in town. A church deacon, a volunteer fireman, a man people relied on. The kind of man who shook hands firmly, remembered birthdays, donated to school events. A man who sent casseroles to grieving neighbors and bowed his head during prayer. A man everyone trusted. A man no one suspected. Not until the summer of 1985. The barn, the bones, and the secret that refused to stay buried. The demolition crew didn't know the history of the Hamilton property. They didn't know about Rachel Ditmire. They didn't know their sledgehammers were about to strike the most important truth the county had been blind to for 34 years. The barn had been abandoned since the late 60s. The new owner bought the land at auction, planning to turn it into a storage facility. The structure was unstable, the wood eaten by termites, the floor sagging under years of neglect. On the third swing of the hammer, the boards cracked open. A smell, sour, chemical, ancient, rose like a ghost from the dirt. Something died under there, one worker muttered, but what they found wasn't a dead animal. They found a shallow cavity lined with white dust, lime, and beneath that, a skull, small, delicate, human. The bones were bundled in fragments of cloth so deteriorated they fell apart when touched. A rusted chain bracelet clung to one wrist bone, and mixed in the lime was something else, a ring. A thin silver band engraved with the initials RRD. When the sheriff arrived, he didn't need a forensic team to tell him the name. Rachel Ditmire had been found, after 34 years of silence. And within hours of that discovery, the quiet town of Whitfield County erupted into the loudest storm it had ever known. The investigation reopened, and the name that kept appearing. Detectives mapped the barn. They sifted soil samples. They collected bone fragments and reassembled them in a lab. But the most chilling moment came when the medical examiner flipped through the skeleton and stopped. She was pregnant, he said. They found fetal bones, a second, much smaller skeleton, and suddenly everything changed. Rachel hadn't run away. She hadn't gotten lost. She hadn't had an accident. She'd been murdered, and she'd been pregnant. The town turned inside out with speculation. Only one question mattered. Who was the father? Her family didn't know. Her friends didn't know. Her diary didn't say a word. But there were rumors. Rachel had been spending long hours at the Hamilton house. She worked closely with the children. She helped Thomas repair tools in the workshop. She often arrived early, long before Margaret was awake. And some nights, neighbors had seen her leaving late, too late. Detectives started their interviews. Every road, every suspicion, every rumor pointed back to one man. The man who said she left at noon. The man who stayed calm. The man who always had the right words and the right smile. Thomas Hamilton. The community watched as two cruisers rolled up the long gravel driveway to his farmhouse. Thomas stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't flinch, didn't tremble, didn't act surprised. He simply lifted his chin and said, "You boys must be mistaken." But they weren't. Not this time. Inside his workshop, behind a row of metal cabinets, officers found something that made every doubt evaporate. A box, old wooden, sealed tight. Inside, a ribbon Rachel used to wear in her hair, letters she wrote but never mailed, a small baby blanket unfinished with her handwriting on the corner, and a photograph of Thomas and Rachel standing close, too close, behind the Hamilton barn. Months before she disappeared. Thomas claimed the items meant nothing, but the truth was already out. The community already knew. The man they trusted, the man they respected, the man they invited to their dinner tables, had been living with a secret darker than anything Whitfield County had ever imagined, a secret he thought he buried forever. A community turns against its own. Within hours of the discovery, the news spread through Whitfield County like wildfire. A town that once prided itself on unity found itself divided in a way no one had ever imagined. Some residents refused to believe Thomas Hamilton could be guilty. "This is nonsense," one elderly farmer insisted. "Tom Hamilton helped build this town. He baptized my grandchildren. He's no killer." But others whispered darker memories, memories they had buried just as easily as Thomas had buried Rachel. "I always thought he was strange with the girls at church," one woman muttered. "Too friendly, too close." "I saw him arguing with Rachel once behind the barn," another man recalled. "She looked scared." Fear, disbelief, anger, all of it twisted together into a storm that swept through the county. The Ditmire family, meanwhile, sat silently in their living room as detectives broke the news. Rachel was dead. Rachel had been murdered. Rachel had been pregnant. Her mother collapsed. Her father clenched his jaw so tightly his teeth cracked. For 34 years they had lived with grief. But now came a new kind of pain, the kind born not from uncertainty but from truth, the truth they never wanted. Inside the Hamilton house, a wife who knew too much. When detectives entered the Hamilton home to execute the search warrant, they found Margaret Hamilton sitting at the kitchen table, motionless, staring at a cold cup of coffee. "Mrs. Hamilton," Detective Avery said gently, "we need to ask you some questions." She didn't look up. Her hands shook as she traced the rim of her mug. "I knew this day would come," she whispered. The detectives exchanged glances. "What do you mean?" Avery asked. Margaret inhaled sharply, tears filling her eyes. "I knew Tom hurt that girl, but I didn't know how." Her voice cracked. "I should have said something. God forgive me, I should have said something." Detective Avery pulled out a chair. "Mrs. Hamilton, what exactly did you know?" Margaret closed her eyes, and for a moment it seemed she might refuse to speak. Then, something in her broke loose, something that had been building for decades. The secret she had kept for 34 years. "It was the summer of 1951, she began. "Rachel had been working here for a few months. She was sweet, helpful. The children loved her." She paused, clutching the edge of the table. "But Tom started paying her too much attention." Her voice trembled. "He wasn't cruel to her. At least, not at first. He was charming, gentle. He'd follow her around the barn, bring her little gifts, offer to walk her home." Detectives listened silently. "I thought it was harmless," Margaret said quietly. "But one night I woke up and he wasn't in bed. I went outside and saw them behind the barn, kissing." She wiped her eyes. "She looked scared when she saw me. He told me it was nothing, that she was confused, that women her age get attached." Margaret swallowed hard. "But a month later, I found Rachel crying in the kitchen. She begged me to help her, Told me she needed to leave the farm, that she was afraid of him. Detective Avery leaned forward. Did she say why? Margaret nodded, her voice barely a whisper. She told me she was pregnant. The room fell silent, and my husband wasn't going to let her ruin everything he had built. Margaret covered her mouth, sobbing. I didn't think he'd kill her. I swear to God I didn't, but I knew he was capable of hurting her. Why didn't you report it? Avery demanded. Margaret shook her head violently. You didn't know Tom back then. He was different, angry, controlling. He told me if I ever spoke a word, he'd make sure I disappeared too. Detectives exchanged grim looks. Margaret Hamilton had lived in fear for 34 years, but fear was no longer enough to protect Thomas. Not now. The interrogation. Cracks in the armor. Thomas Hamilton sat in the interrogation room with the same calm confidence he had displayed his entire life. His shirt was neatly tucked, his hair was combed, his voice was steady. You're making a terrible mistake, he told the detectives. Rachel left. I told you that 34 years ago. I'm telling you again. Avery placed the evidence box on the table. Thomas didn't react. He didn't flinch when Avery removed the hair ribbon. He didn't blink when he saw the letters. He didn't stir when shown the photograph. But when Avery pulled out the baby blanket, Thomas's jaw tightened, just for a split second. A crack. Mr. Hamilton, Avery said softly. Rachel was pregnant. Silence. Then Thomas leaned back in his chair and exhaled through his nose, a slow, steady breath. You people always want a villain, he said. Someone to blame, a monster. Well, I'm not your monster. Avery tapped the blanket. Then how do you explain this? Thomas looked at it for a long moment. People keep things, he said finally. Mementos, memories. Avery raised an eyebrow. You kept mementos of a girl who disappeared the same day you were alone with her? Thomas smiled faintly, a cold, empty smile. People disappear all the time, detective. Another crack. Avery leaned in, voice low. Not in Whitfield County, they don't. Thomas didn't answer. He couldn't. Not without revealing everything. His silence said more than words ever could. A chilling discovery. More victims. Late that evening, detectives continued their search of the Hamilton property. Behind the workshop, past a row of rusted plows, they found something hidden behind a sheet of metal fencing. A second patch of disturbed earth, fresh. Within minutes, shovels hit something solid. A shoe, a human shoe, attached to a decomposing foot. The body was far more recent, no more than 5 or 6 years old. And when they recovered the clothing, the badge, the wallet, the sheriff nearly dropped to his knees. It was Deputy Lewis Crawford, a local officer who vanished in 1979. The case no one ever solved, the man no one found. The disappearance everyone blamed on an out-of-state drifter. Detectives stared at the grave in horror. Thomas Hamilton hadn't just killed once, he had killed twice, maybe more. The quiet, trusted farmer, the church deacon, the man they all admired, was a serial predator hiding in plain sight for decades, and Whitfield County would never be the same again. The day Rachel died, the truth finally emerges. 34 years after Rachel Ditmire vanished, detectives finally pieced together the fragments of her final hours. The details came from Margaret Hamilton's trembling confession, faded witness statements, and the hidden notes found in Rachel's belongings. What they reconstructed was devastating. June 14, 1951. The morning Rachel arrived at the Hamilton farm just after sunrise, as she always did. She carried a small lunch tin, a blue ribbon in her hair, and a nervous energy she couldn't hide. She had made a decision the night before. She was going to tell Thomas she was leaving the job, leaving Whitfield County, leaving him. She even wrote a note to her parents. Detectives found the torn, half-written page in her old diary. I can't stay here anymore. I need to tell the truth. I'm scared. When Thomas saw her walking toward the barn, he didn't wave like usual. He didn't smile. He simply waited. Margaret had already left for town. The children were still asleep. It was the perfect moment, the perfect trap. And Rachel walked straight into it. The last conversation, and the moment everything changed. Margaret recalled hearing raised voices that morning as she returned unexpectedly to grab a forgotten purse. She didn't see the argument, but she heard it, words drifting through the cracked barn windows. "Tom, I can't do this anymore." "You don't get to decide that. I'm leaving, today. You're not going anywhere." Margaret froze in place. Then a sound, a sharp cry, cut short. She backed away, terrified, her breath shaking, her hands trembling so badly she dropped her purse in the dirt. She didn't go inside. She didn't try to stop him. Fear, as it always had, silenced her. When she returned later, Tom was alone, stacking bales of hay. Rachel was gone. "Went home early," he said without blinking. Margaret wanted to scream. But she swallowed the truth and lived with it for 34 long years. Deputy Crawford, the second victim who knew too much. Detective Avery spread old case files across the table, looking for anything that could connect the dots. That's when something jumped out. Deputy Louis Crawford didn't disappear randomly. He vanished on August 2nd, 1979. The same week, investigators reopened Rachel's case after a new sheriff took office. Crawford had been assigned to re-interview old witnesses. One of those witnesses? Margaret Hamilton. And Thomas had been furious when he found Crawford talking to her. Records showed Crawford visited the Hamilton house twice. A neighbor even saw the deputy and Thomas arguing in the yard. Then, without warning, Crawford vanished. His patrol car was found abandoned near the state highway, shoes neatly placed by the door. No signs of struggle. Everyone assumed he ran away or had a breakdown, but now detectives knew better. The body they unearthed behind Thomas's workshop ended that mystery forever. Crawford had gotten close to the truth, close enough to die for it. The arrest. A town holds its breath. When detectives returned for Thomas, the sky was bruised purple, storm clouds gathering over the fields. Flashing blue lights reflected off the barn that had hidden Rachel's bones for decades. Thomas stepped onto his porch as calmly as if welcoming dinner guests. "Evening, boys." Detective Avery read the charges. First-degree murder of Rachel Ditmire. First-degree murder of unborn child. First-degree murder of Deputy Louis Crawford. Destruction of evidence, aggravated concealment of human remains. As Avery spoke, the wind picked up, whipping dust across the yard. Margaret stood at the doorway, hands shaking violently. For the first time in her life, she looked straight at him. "Tom," she whispered, "I'm done protecting you." Thomas didn't meet her eyes, but his jaw flexed, a flicker of rage beneath the surface. Detectives cuffed him, but he didn't resist. "Be careful walking on that gravel," Thomas said coldly. "Wouldn't want anyone else disappearing." Avery shoved him into the cruiser, disgusted. The entire county stood silently as the man they once trusted was driven away. The church deacon, the respected farmer, the family man, now revealed as something far darker. The trial. Secrets dragged into the light courtroom seats were filled every day. Reporters came from Indianapolis, Chicago, Louisville. The Ditmire family sat in the front row, clutching tissues, bracing themselves for details they had waited decades to hear. Margaret took the stand first. She told everything, every bruise, every threat. Every night she lay awake terrified of the man sleeping next to her. The court listened in stunned silence. Then came the forensic experts. Lime on Rachel's. Remains matched lime from Thomas's barn. The unborn child's DNA could only match one man within the community, Thomas. Crawford's remains showed trauma consistent with blunt force from a metal tool. Finally, detectives presented the photos from the box Thomas hid for 34 years. The ribbon, the letters, the blanket, the photograph of him and Rachel. Thomas stared straight ahead, expression frozen. Not a tear, not a blink, not an ounce of remorse. The confession, a monster, finally speaks. After weeks of trial, Thomas finally broke. During a recess, he asked to speak to Detective Avery alone. Avery entered the small holding room. Thomas smiled faintly. "You've worked hard," he said. "You deserve something." "Tell me what you did," Avery demanded. Thomas leaned forward, eyes gleaming with a cold satisfaction. "You think I murdered her because she was pregnant?" he said. "But that wasn't the reason." Avery stiffened. "Then why?" Thomas exhaled slowly. "Because she told me she was going to tell your sheriff." A pause. "And she said she'd tell Margaret." He chuckled softly. I couldn't have that, Detective. I had a reputation. And Crawford? Avery said. Crawford was stubborn, Thomas sighed. He kept digging, so I dug a hole for him too. Avery's stomach twisted. Thomas's smile widened. That's the problem with people, he whispered. They dig. Verdict, justice. After 34 years. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours, guilty on all counts. When the verdict was read, Rachel's mother wept into her hands. Her father bowed his head, finally letting decades of grief fall off his shoulders. Margaret Hamilton collapsed, sobbing, whispering through tears. I'm free. I'm finally free. Thomas showed no reaction. As deputies escorted him out, he paused and turned to the Ditmire family. You got your answer, he said softly. But answers don't bring her back. Avery stepped forward. No, he replied. But truth does what you couldn't. It ends the fear. And Thomas was taken away, chains clinking, disappearing down the hallway toward a lifetime behind bars. Aftershocks. A town learns to breathe. Again. Whitfield County did not return to normal overnight. How could it? For decades, people had waved to Thomas Hamilton at church, bought eggs from him, let their children pet his horses. They trusted him with their homes, their prayers, their secrets. Learning that he had murdered a 19-year-old girl and a deputy shattered something deep inside the community. In the diner downtown, conversations stopped whenever someone mentioned his name. Old men who once bragged about working on his farm stared down at their coffee mugs in shame. Mothers clutched their children tighter in public. Pastor Richards gave a sermon titled, "The Wolves Among Us," reminding people that sometimes evil smiles, shakes your hand, and stands beside you in the church choir. The whole county felt bruised, betrayed, and somehow less innocent. Yet, in that pain, something else grew, a shared determination that Rachel Ditmire's name would never again be lost or buried. The Ditmire family. Healing after decades of silence. Rachel's parents, Harold and Grace Ditmire, didn't celebrate the verdict. They didn't cheer. They didn't smile. They simply sat side by side on their porch swing, holding hands in the warm July evening, letting the knowledge settle that their daughter had finally been found. Grace began sleeping again for the first time in 34 years. Not well, not peacefully, but without waking from nightmares of Rachel trapped somewhere calling for help. Harold, who had spent nearly every day walking the same path Rachel took that June morning, stopped pacing the road. He planted a small rosebush beside the barn where her remains were found. She ain't here, he told Avery quietly, but this is where I found her. So this is where something of hers ought to grow. Rachel's younger sister, Miriam, now in her 40s, gathered every old photograph they had left and created an album titled For Rachel with Love. She brought it to the sheriff's office, and Avery kept it on his desk. He said it reminded him why cases like this mattered. Margaret Hamilton, freedom after a lifetime in chains. When the trial ended, Margaret filed for divorce. She packed a single suitcase, grabbed an old quilt her mother had made, and left the farmhouse forever. For weeks she stayed with her sister 2 counties over. She wasn't talkative. She spent most evenings sitting quietly on the back porch, sipping tea, staring at the fireflies. Her sister finally asked, "Maggie, what are you thinking about?" Margaret took a long breath. "I'm thinking," she whispered, "that I finally get to live without being afraid." She began therapy, something unheard of for women her age in rural Indiana, and slowly, painfully, began reclaiming the parts of herself Thomas had crushed. The first time she laughed freely, her sister cried. The weight was lifting, piece by piece, after decades of poison. Detective Avery, a man haunted by the case. The night after Thomas was sentenced, Avery sat alone in his office, the hum of the fluorescent lights echoing above him. He stared at the evidence box sitting on his desk, the ribbon, the blanket, the letters. He opened Rachel's last unfinished note for the 100th time. "I can't stay here anymore. I have to be brave." She had tried. She had wanted to escape. She almost made it. Avery rubbed his face, overwhelmed by a mix of anger, sadness, and exhaustion. Cold cases always left scars, but This one dug deeper. He whispered to the empty room, "I'm sorry we didn't find you sooner." The letter. No one expected. A message from the past. A week after the trial, Rachel Ditmire stopped by the sheriff's office. She was holding a small box, dusty and wrapped with twine. She explained she found it in the attic tucked behind old Christmas decorations. "It's Rachel's," she said softly. "Her handwriting." Inside were old keepsakes from her teenage years, a dried flower, a school pin, a movie stub. But beneath those items was a sealed envelope addressed only to Mom and Dad, if anything happens. Grace and Harold were too shaken to open it, so they asked Detective Avery to read it first. Hands trembling, Avery carefully unfolded the yellowed paper. Rachel's handwriting was neat but rushed. "If you are reading this, it means I didn't get away like I planned. Please know I tried. I was scared, but I was trying to be strong. I love you both more than anything in the world. If I disappear, it wasn't an accident. Don't believe anyone who says I ran away. I would never leave home. Please tell Miriam to always chase her dreams, and please don't let them forget me." Rachel Avery felt tears prick his eyes. He read it aloud to the Ditmire family. Grace collapsed into Harold's arms, sobbing softly. "We won't forget you, baby," she cried. "We never did." The barn, transformed into a memorial. The new owner of the land, the man who hired the demolition crew that discovered Rachel's remains, made a decision that touched the entire community. He canceled his development plans. Instead, he asked the Ditmire family for permission to turn the area into a memorial garden. They agreed. Volunteers came from across the county. They cleared the old boards, planted rows of flowers, and installed a stone marker that read, "In loving memory of Rachel Ditmire, 1932-1951. May her light guide us toward truth." People visited throughout the summer. Some left flowers, some left letters. Some simply stood quietly, remembering a girl they never really knew, yet whose story had changed everything. Thomas Hamilton, the monster in a cage. Thomas adjusted to prison life with the same eerie calm he displayed at trial. He refused visitors, refused chaplain calls, refused to speak to reporters. But he did ask for one thing: writing materials. Guards found dozens of notebooks in his cell, filled with ramblings, drawings, dark, disjointed memories. None of them expressed remorse. One entry, however, chilled the warden. "People dig, and when they dig, they find things, bones, secrets. I wonder what they'll find next." Authorities searched his former property again, twice. Nothing new surfaced. But the note left an unsettling question floating through the county. Was Rachel really the first? Or just the first they found? No one would ever know for certain. A community reclaimed, and a legacy that endures. As summer turned to fall, Whitfield County slowly reclaimed its sense of safety, not the naive trust of the past, but a new, stronger unity built on truth and vigilance. Rachel's story became part of local history. School children learned about her. The memorial became a symbol of change, a reminder to listen, to believe, and to protect. Grace Ditmire visited the memorial every Sunday. She placed a fresh flower beside the stone and whispered a small prayer. "I love you, sweetheart. We found you." And for the first time in decades, she felt peace.